There is little reason to think President Obama is a lock for re-election. A slew of polls out this week makes one thing clear. We do not know who will occupy the White House come January 20th, 2013. The NBC News Wall Street Journal poll shows President Obama with a 6-point lead over presumptive Republican nominee Mitt Romney. The CBS News New York Times poll shows the two contenders even. And a Quinnipiac poll shows the president leading by 4 points. Look, any way you slice it, this thing is close. And each election hinges on certain recurring factors. For re-election, the first issue is the strength of the opponent. As they say, you can't beat somebody with nobody. Second, economic indicators, particularly unemployment. Remember this, lower is better for re-election. Third, war. Wartime incumbents usually hold an electoral kind of rally around the flag edge, but after more than 10 years of combat in foreign lands, it's not clear how much rallying this incumbent can expect. And fourth, the ground game. Chicago may have rewritten the book in 2008. This time, their opponent may be short on charisma, but his very being exudes organization, attention to minutia. The battleground on the ground will be epic. And then there's the fifth, or X factor. President Obama is black. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you think we were past that? Hardly. Let's go back to the numbers again, where the racial polarization is palpable. Among black voters, Barack Obama leads Mitt Romney by 91 points. I did not inverse that. It wasn't 19. 91 points. Now, that number is more or less in line with African-American voting in 2008. For the Obama campaign, the issue with black voters will be turnout. But among white voters, Mitt Romney is leading the president 52 to 36%. That's a 16-point spread, and bigger than the 12-point advantage McCain had over Obama in 2008 on Election Day. Not necessarily a much bigger gap for President Obama, but off the charts when compared to the last time a relatively centrist Democratic president ran for re-election. When Bill Clinton beat Bob Dole in 1996, he did so with a coalition of racial minorities who helped him to overcome a deficit among white voters. But Clinton only lost white voters by 3 points. In the end of race, Don Kinder and Allison Dale Ritter posit the theory that had it not been for race, Obama's 2008 margin of victory would have been a landslide. Obama, they say, won in spite of race, because even though race was omnipresent in his very body, candidate Obama rarely spoke of race. In fact, his biographical presentation, going back to the landmark 2004 convention speech, was truly all-inclusive. Voters were free to project their vision of the ideal candidate onto him. And for white voters, some were liberals who saw Senator Obama as the chance to participate in a great moment of racial transcendence by casting their ballot for a black man. Then there were others who, because of personal politics or personal bias, simply never would have voted for candidate Obama under any circumstances. And then finally, there was the great vast middle of moderate Democrats and of disaffected Republicans who were open to voting for a black candidate if he could demonstrate he was the right candidate. And Senator Obama's unique story allowed them entree into the big tent. But for those voters, President Obama of 2012 is not the blank canvas that he was in 2008. He now has a specific record of governing, a record that I contend, because of his race, will be held to a much higher standard than it would have been for a white incumbent. Those white voters who found what they were looking for in 2008 will not necessarily be so enthusiastic in 2012. And the election of 2008 may have made history in the election of the first black president, but the much greater challenge, and I think maybe even the greater indication of social change, would be the re-election of the first black president in 2012. At the table with me, Alex Wagner, host of MSNBC's Now, Doug Thornhill, a Democratic strategist and former press secretary for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, DCCC, Robert Traynham, former communications director for Rick Santorum, and now an MSNBC contributor, and journalist Rebecca Tracer of Salon.com. She's also the author of Big Girls Don't Cry. Hey, everyone.
Hello.
Hey. Thanks for hanging out during my long screen about what I think is going on in 2012. Alex, do I have this right in terms of the things that I've laid out? Is this what it takes for a president to be reelected? You know, the strength of the other candidate, war, the economy, and in this case also race.
Sure. I mean, I think race absolutely has to do with the conversation around re-election, and I think your point about the re-election of the first black president is almost more of a milestone for American culture than the election. There are things to unpack within each one of those,
sure.
And I think we can't underestimate the complexity in terms of the opponent. Mitt Romney is in many ways a cipher, and you're seeing Team Obama sort of reconfigure its strategy vis-a-vis Team Romney. In the primary season, it was Mitt Romney's a flip-flopper. Mitt Romney has no core. We are now seeing a pivot. It's been acknowledged in the pages of the New York Times that the Obama team is really looking to paint Mitt Romney as a crazy, hardcore conservative.
Yeah, right.
That's twofold. One, it's to, undermine, I think, a lot of the positions that he took when he was governor of Massachusetts. It's to draw a stark difference between the president. It's also to strike fear in the hearts of liberals who I think in many ways aren't paying a lot of attention to this race, or perhaps aren't as ginned up in terms of enthusiasm.
The language of cipher is much nicer than the language of etch-a-sketch, which is an awful lot of what we heard. But how then are we to understand sort of, now we've got to paint Mitt Romney as this extreme conservative?
Well, here's why. Alex is absolutely on point with what she said, because there's really two pillars of the Democratic Party that President Obama won that he needs for re-election. Number one, college-educated white women. And this is the reason why you hear this quote-unquote GOP war on women, if you will. And secondly, it was minorities. You mentioned a few moments ago, Melissa, 91% in young people. If, in fact, the president can hold on to those two strongholds, he will win re-election. But here's the problem, and hopefully we can talk about this. He's got a major problem. He's always had, but he has a major problem with blue-collar Reagan Democrats and blue-collar white men out there, particularly that are not educated in terms of a four-year degree. And that's the main reason why, Melissa, you hear him talking about college education. You hear him talking about community colleges, is because he's trying to bring up those numbers with white working-class men.
Yeah, I mean, white folks are kind of a tough voting bloc because they, right? I mean, we always think about Latinos or African Americans as voting blocs, but in this case, right, as we start to sort of pick apart what is the white electorate, right, we've got young people who went very strong for President Obama, we've got the question of women, working class, all of these intersections on this notion of whiteness.
Right. Well, I think what's happening is voters are shopping around right now, and especially with the blue-collar working class whites who have always been not necessarily a strength of the president's. They're shopping around. Now, for the president's campaign, the good thing is the candidate that they're running against is probably not the best person to win those votes. He has some real problems connecting with white working class voters. But there's also something else that I don't think we're talking about here. This has been a strategy going back to 1968 by the Republican Party to kind of divide the electorate based on racial lines, and that really started with the Southern strategy. And it's not so much unique to President Obama. The Democratic Party has had problems with rural white voters, with Southern voters for years now, and he actually did better than than every Democratic candidate running for president.
Running the first time.
That's right. Yeah, right. And he's still right around where he needs to be to get reelected.
Mm-hmm. And actually, one of the things I think we should mention is that with every election, the white vote and whether you win it actually matters less and less.
Yeah.
So that's a crucial thing. I mean, the fact is, he did lose the white vote. He lost both white men and white women, and he still won in 2008 by a big margin. In fact, I think he was the first presidential candidate to lose white men by double digits and still win the election.
Right.
So, and what you're looking at is an electorate that is increasingly diverse. In 2008, I think it was 26% black and Latino voters, non-white voters, and it's projected to be at 28% this year, though voter suppression measures in lots of states around the country could have a real practical impact on that. And that's something I think we really need to keep in mind, and also talk about the connection, the Republican strategy in states around the country when you talk about the variety of voter suppression measures and how it's that does real damage to those chances.
So let me ask you a question. So voters of color may have the votes, but white folks have the money, right? Just in the most dramatic ways, right? When we look at those wealth and income gaps.
Historically, in terms of giving, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I was just looking, the cover of the New York Times today, big donations dropped sharply for the president, right? Because clearly, at least some of it is about this assessment that maybe this is a lock already. But if he's having trouble with white folks, it could be also a money problem, right?
Well, he's actually doing pretty well with raising money. I mean, I don't think anyone should be, crying for the Obama's campaign. I mean, they're doing a pretty good job of raising their money. They've always raised a lot of money from small dollar donors. You know, the Romney campaign actually is depending upon these huge donations, and his campaign is really depending upon these outside groups to run kind of a supportive shadow campaign for him. But the president, I think there's also an enthusiasm gap when it comes to raising money between the two candidates. And so, but I think as we get closer...
Honestly, if I get one more of those text messages or emails, I was literally
tonight, Saturday, all the kind of weird titles.
I was lecturing in class, and my entire, there's half of the class, and you start hearing, and I was like, what is it? I'm like, oh, it's the president texting again.
Well, Melissa, breaking news. I thought it was coming from the Romney campaign. I thought you were going to say that you're getting texts asking for money.
Spiced up their subject lines as well. I do think, in terms of the fundraising thing, the biggest disparity is obviously the super PACs. I mean, the Obama super PAC is basically a drop in the bucket compared to Crossroads GPS. But this strategy of painting Romney as a crazy conservative, assuming people buy it, and even irregardless of that, there is going to be a debate, and I think the White House relishes this, and as do the Republicans to some degree, about the American Social Compact. And we're going to see that in the general election, and I think I do think people will open up their pocketbooks when they understand Social Security is on the line, funding and more about that.